it was a new approach to the idea of time travel, because time travel is ends up becoming one of the main themes of this movie, but it's not the time travel we're used to. It's a different kind of way of thinking about traveling through time mentally, and you're experiencing time because eventually throughout this film, as we watch more and as Amy Adams' character Louise learns more about the alien language, she learns that the alien language isn't held back by time, and it is a circle. And so the circle is the main theme of this movie, I think, and eventually it gets to the point where as you learn this language like Louise does, the more you learn it, the more it's kind of like, I think it alters her mind and her brain as she learns the language, because then once she starts learning the language, she begins experiencing what we think are flashbacks, but are actually flash forwards to the future with her daughter. And so she is starting to experience time on like a flat circle as well. And so she's not like traveling through time, but her lifetime is now a circle. It's not point A to point B. And so I think that's one of the main themes of the film, and it's a really interesting way to think about traveling through time, not physically, but in your mind and mentally.
Yeah, and just a heads up, if you haven't seen this movie, there's going to be some spoilers, especially in this film, that you don't want to hear spoilers for this movie if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And so what you're basically referring to is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which basically means that if you learn and study a foreign language long enough, you basically rewire your brain and the way you think
physically,
to determine how you perceive the world differently, and because this language now determines how you think. And so, as you said, as Dr. Banks, Louise learns more about this alien language, she begins to acquire the knowledge of how they think. And like you said, they experience time differently, more in a circle rather than we're humans and we experience the present constantly. We're always in the present. We experience time linear. But as you can tell by just the language that they write with the ink, and it's circular too, and it's almost like a palindrome. It goes backwards and forwards. So
and her daughter's name is Hannah, so it's a palindrome.
Yeah, that's a palindrome too. And then also, spoiler alert, the greatest thing I think about this film, obviously when we get to the climax and we start to understand everything, is the opening of this movie is of this woman Louise and her daughter. And her daughter's birth, and then her daughter's horrible sickness and disease and early death. And it's interesting because the first time you watch this, obviously we're human again. We're experiencing time linear, so we're thinking this movie experiences time the same way as us.
And so that means that we think that Louise's daughter died before the events of the film. So these are her thinking about flashbacks of her daughter.
And Denis does a really clever thing is, when we finally see Louise later, like at the college, she seems like distraught or cut off from the world. She doesn't even pay attention to the news broadcast. She seems hollow inside. And when the first time you watch this, you're like, it's because she's mourning the death of her child. But what we've learned eventually is that, and she even says a couple lines, like she says, "Who is this child?" And these are like little hints that the beginning of the movie is actually the end, but also the other way around, because it's all a circle. So she hasn't had this child who she's having visions of yet. But as she learns that language, as she learns the alien language, that's why she's seeing these visions before she's even encountered the aliens.
Because she will encounter the aliens and she will learn the language. So her mind is already it's already predetermined that she's going to fall into this loop of a circle of time travel. And I think that, because you're right, it's smart to point out how in her first scenes, she seems very distant and distraught, and I think it's because she's feeling the loss of her daughter, but she hasn't experienced it yet. But she's feeling those feelings and those emotions, even though it happens years down the line. So I think because she ends up becoming in a looped timeline with herself, she hasn't experienced these moments, but she's feeling the emotional aftermath of them.
And she also has another great line in the beginning of the film where she says, "I used to think that this was the beginning of your story. We're so bound by time." And so she, again, isn't really understanding yet what's going on. Thank you for watching Raiders of the Lost podcast. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Listen to the audio format of Raiders of the Lost podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every Monday and Thursday. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast.